Let's move swiftly along to Miss Bachan. She is the representative for the Student Psychology Association. She'll be discussing on the mental and emotional impacts of domestic violence. So just a short intro. Miss Emily Bachan is the founder of the Psychological Support and Guidance Enterprise, and she represents the UE Student Psychology Association. She has a passion to help others suffering from psychological health issues. And please welcome Miss Emily Bachan as she presents on mental aspect.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome, Vaishmati. I'm so happy to be presenting today on the psychological impacts that it has on domestic violence and all the types of violence that persons go through on a daily basis. So I'm going to touch very swiftly because this is such a wide topic that there are so many things that I could talk about, but we'd be here all day. So I'm just going to touch on a few things, right? So some of the common mental, I should say psychological effects that persons that are victims of domestic violence might include post-traumatic stress disorder. They might even have depression, as in very severe depression. They might have anxiety, social anxiety specifically. They would even have low self-esteem, right? And sometimes all of these things can lead to, suicidal ideation in person's thoughts, right? And then they can get into alcohol and drug abuse, right? So these are some of the impacts that, are common that affect a person psychologically when they are victims of domestic violence. So when we look at post-traumatic stress disorder, we can see that this could include like flashbacks, where the person having nightmares, very severe anxiety, uncontrollable thoughts, and these things tend to, affect the person like on a daily basis. So if they, they have to go to work, if they have to go to school, if they have that interpersonal relationship that is very toxic and it's negative, they tend to have that post-traumatic stress disorder. And even if they had multiple relationships that they probably ended, and they have these flashbacks due to those past relationships that they would have had, you can see that they would be suffering from these things. And those things tend to be like disorders, right? They tend to develop it over a prolonged period of time, right? And then you can see that depression develops, which would include the prolonged sadness. Now, I want to touch on depression in a little bit of depth, right? Not so much, but I just want to explain the difference between depression and sadness, because most times persons get very confused between them, and they feel that I'm if somebody say, okay, well, I'm depressed, but you don't really understand the what is the main effects or causes of being depressed. And everybody experiences sadness, right? Sadness is a common emotion that we feel, just like happiness, being surprised, being fearful, and whatnot, right? So when you look at depression, there can be cognitive, physical, and behavioral impacts, right, that depression can bring about an individual's well-being. And some of these things would look like changes in eating habits. They can either eat too much, they can either not be eating at all. Um, Sometimes they might think about that often. So like I say, they could have suicidal ideation, they could have difficulty concentrating and making decisions, they're very indecisive. They might even feel very tired, very fatigued, like what's the point of getting up every day and doing stuff, right? They could even have feelings of worthlessness, right? They might move very slowly, they might not be as energetic. um, they would have a tendency to be easily agitated, right? So these are some of the main symptoms that you could look out for a person that is probably experiencing depression. And these persons are probably victims of domestic violence, or any type of violence, probably street harassment, or any emotional or physical abuse can lead to these disorders or depression or PTSD, like I was saying before, right? So when we're looking at domestic violence and how it psychologically impacts us, we have to look at not just the physical, but you have to look at the psychological mental states, right? And sometimes we have to take in consideration the common emotional effects of domestic violence that can look, these are some symptoms that a person can actually show, is like hopelessness. They might say statements like, you, I don't know what to do anymore. I just had to, shut my mouth and, living with it. What I do? That's Trini, layman's terms. That is what we see happen, right? And that shows ambivalence, like the person is hopeless, they feel like there's no way out. And I mean, there are reasons why they would feel like, oh, I can't get out of the situation, because probably they have kids. Sometimes that could be a reason that, they're thinking about their children's lives too, right? But not realizing that, I'm putting myself in this position where I'm suffering myself, I'm suffering my sanity, and they'll be psychologically and sometimes physically impacted, right? And then you can see they would be feeling unworthy. Sometimes they would be questioning themselves, and having this low self-esteem where they think, like, I don't know, like I don't deserve anything good in life. They would say stuff like that, right? And that is what the signs you want to see in a person that showing some psychological problem, right? And then sometimes they can be apprehensive and discouraged about the future. So let's say they get out of a relationship that was abusive, right, in a domestic case, right? Because we're looking at domestic violence. Sometimes that can you know, put a dampen on their future relationships. Like if they want to get into other relationships, they might not want to, venture into it because they're scared. They have fear that they're going to be psychologically, abused or physically abused, right? And both of them are very important, and we have to look at it, and this is serious. Like nobody should be treated that way, right? And sometimes the main aspect of it when they get into a relationship is that they have the inability to trust, right? So interpersonal relationships is where um you want to put your investments, meaning your psychological as well as your how to put it, materialistic investment in a person where you want to trust them, right? And that is something that a person might lack, right? If they cannot trust well enough because they just feel like somebody's going to take advantage of me, right? And last but not least, they would just feel demotivated, right? Persons that are in a abusive relationship in domestic violence cases, they just feel demotivated on a daily basis. It's like, what's the point in living? Um, and those are some of the psychological impacts that it has on an individual that is suffering from these very devastating I don't know how else we can describe it, but it's really sad to see it. And it's sometimes we think, like, what is there that we can do to help, but there are things we can do to help them. And it starts with us, start the conversation, and also spreading the hotlines like Miss Andrews was saying. And these resources would be helpful for persons that are they're stuck and there's no way, nobody to turn to. Sometimes they feel like they can't trust their own family too, because especially in Trinidad, like the world too small, right? Everybody know your business, and it's like they have this fear of coming out and speaking out, like, listen, this is what's happening to me and it's not okay, right? And these are some things that we have to look for, in order to help and alleviate some person's situations. Like, everybody is saying now, this is a code. If you see something, say something. Don't just look by and be like, oh, yeah, I'm not going to get involved with that. No, you should, because it's somebody's life you're talking about, because it can lead to the very sad ends that we don't want to happen to our loved ones, right? So this wraps up a little bit about the psychological impacts on domestic violence, and I hope that this enlightened you all. And yes, so thank you so much for being here.
All right, thank you so much, Ms. Bachan, for the presentation.